Henrietta Swan Leavitt is one of the most important figures in the field of intergalactic studies. And up until a few days ago, I didn't know her name. This video essay was inspired in part by Johnny Harris's How We Mapped the Stars. He goes much further into depth on the historical metrics by which many things in our solar system and universe have been mapped out. His video will be in the description if you are interested. That said, I would like to bring a particular figure mentioned in his video to light. Henrietta Leavitt. So, keep your arms within the vehicle at all times and enjoy the show. Hello there. I was just observing the heavens for my time period accurate telescope. The stars truly are magnificent. Wouldn't you agree? Well, there seems to be something clouding the lens, if I may. Much better. Miss Leavitt was born July 4th, 1868. That same year, Andrew Johnson's impeachment trial was acquitted. That year, the novel Little Women was released. That year, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, North and South Carolina were all readmitted into the Union following the Civil War. That same year, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, granting citizenship and equal protection under the law to all former slaves. So, it was a pretty important year. But our main story starts decades later. After graduating from Harvard University's Society for the Collegiate Instruction of Women, Leavitt went on to work for Harvard in their astronomy department. She did calculations and computation, an aspect of her work that gave her and her peers the title computers. Yes, really. Harvard's first computers were women with degrees. These women, many of which had graduated from esteemed universities, were given the chance to further their research, but notably were given very little respect from the men in their field. The employer of these women, a man by the name of Edward Charles Pickering, deserves some credit for his choice in hiring these women. In many ways, the action was a gesture of rather progressive ideas. Many of Pickering's contemporaries thought the employment of women in the sciences was not only detrimental to the science, but to the health of the woman. In his 1873 book, fellow Harvard professor Edward Clark wrote about what would happen to the body of an educated woman. He wrote, quote, "Her nervous system and brain, her instincts and character are on a lower plane, and incapable of their harmonious and best development," recommending instead that a woman, quote, "let her whole education and life be guided by the divine requirements of her system," those being a woman's traditional household duties of childbearing, cleaning, and cooking. So, Pickering's hiring of these women was a rather progressive act. That said, it wasn't perfect. Later, the computers would be given the nickname Pickering's harem, likely from men who thought the women had no business in the scientific field. A professor and contemporary of the computers, Professor Sarah Frances Whiting, once remarked that a male colleague had said to her, quote, "If all the ladies should know about spectroscopes and cathode rays, who will attend to the buttons and breakfasts?" To call it what it was, Leavitt lived through very misogynistic times. She was employed, sure, But it was kept so limited by her sex that it is ridiculous by any modern standard. While it was scientific work, the computers were largely in charge of clerical duties. Some saw it as little more than what a secretary or librarian did. And as a matter of finances, its pay varied, but it was always a fraction of what the men were making. Women that had other means of security, including Levitt, as she lived with her family, went unpaid. For those who did not, the lower end earned some 25 cents per hour, which translates to $8.75 a week. Today, based on inflation, that is about $12,000 in annual earnings. But to many of these women, the negative stigma and low pay paled in comparison to the greater picture. Those hardships are nothing if overcoming them allows you to do what you love. And for these women, the Harvard computers, they were not new to adversity, especially Henrietta Swan Leavitt. Levitt took a brief leave after she graduated and was hired as a computer. While details are largely important, it is known that she traveled to Europe and then back to the US. But by the time she returned to Harvard, Levitt was nearly completely deaf as a result of an illness that she contracted in her leave. Luckily for Levitt, she wasn't alone, as Annie Cannon, a fellow computer and suffragette, was herself deaf, giving Levitt a much-needed foothold for her to lean on. Now I have gone through much of Levitt's life and many of her hardships, but that doesn't fulfill the burden of proof that Levitt was, quote, one of the greatest historical figures in the field of intergalactic studies. So what exactly did she do? Historically, astronomers, like myself, would record their findings with pen and paper or whatever substitute was available at the time. Trouble came near the turn of the 20th century. Namely, measurements and equations being used in the field of physics were becoming markedly more precise. But the drawings had no such precision. Could it be assumed that a star appearing in different places each night was a property of its movement or our movement? Or is it more likely that the astronomer's hand rested in a slightly different position that night? Luckily for Edward Pickering, recent advances in film sensitivity and fidelity, as well as lens technology, meant that a new avenue for astrophotography was opening up. This burgeoning field allowed for precise recreation of the heavens, a fact that gave astronomers like Pickering new avenues for discovery. One downside of this advent of technology was the sheer quantity of data. This meant that Pickering quickly had too much data for him and his students to handle. So he quickly had the need for highly skilled workers, but also for workers that would accept a low wage. As a consequence of the time, educated women were his best option. So, in 1877, the Harvard computers were formed. Miss Leavitt would soon join their ranks. To say that Leavitt's talent went underutilized is a vast understatement. She, along with the rest of the Harvard computers, weren't even allowed to touch the telescopes their work was based on. Now I'd like to get into her work as a scientist. I am not well versed in astronomy terms, so forgive me if I mispronounce some of these. Leavitt was tasked with identifying a particular type of star, known as variable stars in the small and large Magellanic Clouds. The Magellanic Clouds are smaller satellite galaxies of the Milky Way, and are some of the closest galaxies from our perspective. In her work, Leavitt cataloged over 2,000 stars in this region. The start of her greatest discovery, however, came in 1908, when Pickering, on behalf of Leavitt, published her findings. It is in this publication that Leavitt first draws a correlation between how bright a star is and its period of variation. Here, she concluded that brighter stars have longer periods of variation. This was a bit of a breakthrough. In the very next publication prepared by Leavitt, she went from hypothesizing that brightness and period length had a correlation to describing it accurately, determining there was a logarithmic relationship between periodicity and the absolute brightness of a star. This was huge, so incredibly important. It turns out that if you know the period and brightness of a star, you can determine how far away it is from the observer. Previously, it was impossible to measure distances longer than a few hundred light years. We live in a galaxy more than 100,000 light years across. But with this new revelation, not only could we chart our galaxy, but we could map the universe. This technique, known as Levitts Law, expanded our understanding of the universe immensely. Levitts Law helped determine that neither our sun nor our galaxy is the center of the universe, ending heliocentrism. It helped map galaxies near and far. Edwin Hubble, of satellite telescope fame, used this principle to determine that the universe is expanding, which is a principle that not only aided astronomers, but laid the foundation for relativist physics and quantum mechanics. For her work, in 1926, a mathematician by the name of Gösta Leffler decided to nominate Leavitt for a Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, Leavitt had died 3 years earlier, and Nobel Prizes are not given posthumously. It's a shame, really, for such an important figure to die so young and so early into her career. To never be commended for the work she did in her life, and to fade from the public eye in her death. I hope that in whatever little way I possibly can, I have helped to remedy that. If you didn't before, now you know the name: Henrietta Swan Leavitt. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I just finished filming and I'm off to edit it now. What else? As always, thanks to the people in the description who helped provide the music to this video. Go check out Johnny Harris's video. I think it's a really interesting look about history. Anyway, I hope in my heart of hearts that you enjoyed. Until I see you next time, I'll hit you with the less than 3. I'll see you guys later.